Hello, welcome to the next edition of Top Whatever video. Today I got the top 10 for Duskmourn, and I also got 5 cards that I think might want to play and test and show up in this coming season. But I don't think necessarily they are, of course, top tier by any means. But I do think they have some sort of purpose or something like that. And of course, I got honorable mentions in between the top 5, the 5 things I want to try, and the actual top 10 best cards of the set. So that's what we're going to be talking about today in injuncture to Pioneer, because I don't play Standard or anything like that, unless it's just to get my daily task, but you know. So we're going to look at this in this, like I said, the focus lens of Pioneer, and we're going to get into it. So like I said, right out of the gate, we're going to talk about 5 cards that I'm interested in trying out in particular decks in Explore / Pioneer. Then we will get into the honorable mentions. So let's get into it. All right, let's get into number 5th card on my list that for cards I think are interesting from the set, and that is Screaming Nemesis. Now I like this card in particular for dinosaurs, so we can cast a Marauding Raptor turn 2. Then on turn 3, of course, we can cast Nemesis. It does damage to it. We immediately get to target our opponent, deal 2 to him, and also prevent him from gaining life from the rest of the turn or the game, which is pretty powerful, especially against something like Angels, since we are another mid-sized aggro deck. So I do think this is actually a pretty sweet card for that deck. Keep in mind, I definitely would have had this higher on my list, but I'm doing a retake on number 5 since it wasn't really relevant. So I do think this card actually should be my number 1 on the most sweet cards I want to try out this season, just because I like dinosaurs and it gives me an excuse to play dinosaurs. So I think this card actually makes dinosaurs pretty well positioned in the current meta. They're pretty good against aggro, and really, I mean, Phoenix's removal is not very good against us. And pretty much we can probably fight with most decks in the format, as long as Lotus Field stays in check it and controls a hit and miss type situation. We're quite aggressive most of the time. So I do think this card actually is quite good, even though I don't think it's top 10 potential. But that is number 5. Let's get into the next card. Number 4 on my list is Painter Studio and Deface Gallery. Now this might be like a little bit weird overall. I don't think this card is going to be a full play set, if any at all. What I do want to try it as is only a 2 of. In Pioneer, there's a deck called PNLR. The deck currently plays 8 Impulse effects at 2 mana. The issue with those is they don't really have any extra inherent value other than the Exile 2. So if you're in a board position where you don't really need to draw more cards, it's kind of nice to have this 2 mana just later. You play it on turn 2, and you get the bonus for attacks, right? It does trigger prowess, so that works quite well with Swift Spear, Soulscar Mage in the deck. So you get attack with it on turn 2. You basically get a 3/3 on turn 2, and then the following turn you can play PNLR or whatever and hold up at some interaction. And then later on, whenever you feel comfortable, you can pay into Painter Studio and just exile the top 2 and go from there. So I feel like this card actually could be pretty reasonable, and the advantage is on the board, so it's not as bad into Waste Not, where they will make you discard your impulse draws. And so if it's already on the battlefield because to face Gallery, then you might be pretty reasonable overall. So that's kind of what I want to try this. Like I said, I'm thinking 2 copies. Right now we play 4 and 4 on the 2-drop impulses. I think I want to go 3 and 3 and test 2 of these and see how that actually plays out. Like I said, I don't think you want 4 or 3 or 4 of these copies. The 3 mana for Exile 2 is can be a little bit clunky. They did tax these effects like 1 too many. I think Gallery is actually fine at 2 mana, but if Studio was also at 2 mana, this probably would be a pretty reasonable card. Of course, actually, I'm going to say it would be better than Impulses. So I guess they had to do it this way because you get extra inherent value. But yeah, I do think this is a reasonable card to try out. So for that deck in Pacific. Otherwise, I don't think it's necessarily going to be that good. Let's get into number 3 on cards I like to try out. Number 3 is Surgical Suite and Hospital Room. Now, I think this you're going to be playing for mainly the Surgical Suite. It is a semi-pseudo reanimation spell that also helps with Descend and also, Descended, right? So it definitely helps with that mechanic because these are permanents. So in that regard, it's actually better than like Helping Hand in those decks in particular, right? The other side is just kind of extra flavor. It's not really required. You also could argue this is like a claim, kind of, right? If you squint really hard, you get to return a creature, mana value 3 or less. It's 1 mana more than the claim. And then you get a little bit of bonus later in the game by giving your attacking creature a +1/+1 counter. But I don't think this is necessarily game breaking like any of the rooms in this set. I think, honestly, every room that I've seen this set, this is probably the best one, which says a lot about the overall power level of the room mechanic. Overall, I think it's definitely a decent EDH mechanic or / commander. But for constructed playability, it just did not get there, in my opinion. This mechanic suffers the same problems that, you know, all enchantments have, which is you tap out, you do this thing, you kind of didn't really affect the board in any meaningful way. That's what separates stuff like Wedding Announcement as an enchantment, Fable the Mirror Breaker, because not only did you get the enchantment, you also got a 1/1 immediately, or 2/2 immediately, without any extra cards influencing it. There is one that where it says if you attack with a non-toy, make a toy, but again, that requires you to have other setups. Now, the only thing that I'm thinking that actually these rooms could be useful for in the future is, like in that case, that one there. If Temporary Lockdown is the mainstay 3-mana sweeper from white, you might want to maybe try rooms because they don't get got by Surgical Extract, by Temporary Lockdown. But at the same time, like, they are still a 2-drop help card for the actual matchup. So if control becomes dominant, you might want to try some number of these as a cyborg tech for them. Not necessarily this card here, but in general. There might be some that might be interest to you for the control match in particular. But let's get into number 2 for cards I like to try. So number 2 is Leyline and Mutation. Honestly, out of the new Ley lines, this is the one that sparks me the most when it comes to interest. So what I see with this card here is we can play it for free on turn 1. Do a little bit of ramping with Caryatid, with other kind of mana dorks that produce any color. By the time we hit turn 3 or 4, we should be able to produce 5 of any color, turn 3 or 4, and then we can play Omniscience. Hear me out. We could cast an ETI, draw our entire deck, kind of like the Possibility Storm combo. Then we could just literally put the Borgamos on. No, we can't do it with Borgamos. We would have to do it with Thassa's Oracle. So I guess it's not exactly the same thing, right? So unless magically we do ETI and then we play we cast a free Possibility Storm, then we cast the Borgamos. But overall, that's probably just too much. It's gonna make your deck worse. It's probably better just to ETI into Oracle, and then bam, there's a combo deck. Yeah, I don't know. This deck definitely has some possibilities, either with Emrakul, with Ulamog. You have tons of high-end mana value cards in Pioneer that you could honestly cheat out with this, which you might not think as much, but then again, I started playing back when Conflicts was in Standard, so like I remember the Fusion Elemental, the 5 of all colors for an 8/8, and that was like really dear to me. So like the fact that I can pay the same mana value and quote unquote get an Ulamog, maybe. So it kind of brings back the nostalgia for me. But still, I think this card is better than people are leading on, because most people I think are on the impression this is the weakest of the Leyline cycle, and I don't think it's that. Leyline of Hope is definitely, I think, worse than this. Of course, the red one could be viewed as a little bit of cracked, but I don't think it's necessarily oppressive or it's going to be actually a competitive Magic card. So let's get into the last card that I'm interested in, and I think that could honestly have a good splash. So the card that I am most interested in trying out, I'm going to be featuring it maybe week 1, honestly, and that's Jund Delirium. So what is in the new set that honestly is interesting is this new Wildfire Wicker Folk. It's a 2-mana 3/2 haste. Pretty good stats. It's an artifact creature, and it does make it a little bit more vulnerable to like shatter and stuff, but that's okay. But it has Delirium, and it gets a +1/+1, and trample as long as there's 4 more types in your yard. What I like about this, right, it's actually twofold, right? If you have a mixture of delirium and aggro, that is something we don't really ever see. And honestly, that's kind of interesting because of the fact that, well, does your opponent bring in graveyard hate? Probably not, right? So you're kind of stuck in this weird position as the opponent that you kind of need to attack their graveyard to turn off delirium, so that way they don't get all these extra bonuses on top of it. So I am, of course, going to be trying this out with, of course, everyone's fan favorite card, Grimflare, and Jun aggro / mid-range pile with delirium. But I do think this card actually is quite interesting. Even as like a Gruul card, I like this card in general. I think it has potential of being a good role player in Pioneer. Just alone on stats is pretty fine, right? It kind of reminds me of in Ravnica, there was that Gruul Goblin that you had Riot. Either you can come down as a 2/2 with haste, or it came down as a 3/3, I think, something like that. So like it had the potential of being actually kind of cool and dynamic. This one kind of has the potential of being both those things, right? 3/2 with haste. You do lose out on a point of toughness, but I do like this card. So let me know in the comment section what you guys think about these top 5 cards that I'm interested in. Actually, just like I said, just ignore number 5 because I talked myself out of it. I was thinking there was not an actual card that worked with Bargain, but then I remember the Omen of the Hunt exists. I'm pretty sure it's Omen of the Hunt. So let's get into the honorable mentions. All right, so let's get into the honorable mentions and then get into the top 10. Through PayPal, I'm offering for $20 play your deck through League. I also give you an article about how to improve the list, and as well as some sideboard guides and very particular matchups. If you want to check out, the link is in the description. Now, let's get back into the video. So honorable mentions, number 1, slide. We have Optimistic Scavenger. This is a strictly better, the green creature that came out during Kamigawa, right? It's just literally whenever a creature or enchantment or you unlock a room, which never is really that big of a deal. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So it's strictly better, I think, than that card. It's a 1-mana 1/1, so and it's a human. I don't think that's actually going to matter, but it is interesting nonetheless. Second, we have Shardmaid's Rescue. 1 white, flash. The creature gets hexproof and +1/+1. So until end of turn, of course, for the hexproof. This card, I think, could show up as a 1-of in Lightpaw decks, which this isn't even the best new aura. So we're getting into that later. And last on my list is Popular Egotist. 2 and a black. It basically has a pay a 1 and a black, sacrifice on the creature or enchantment. It gains indestructible, tap it. So if you gotta make sure you do it after you declare attacks. Preferably after blocks are declared. You could probably sack whatever gets blocked that was going to die in combat. And of course, this thing has whenever a creature, whenever you sacrifice a permanent, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I will be trying this out this season. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be airing the first week of new season, or if, of course, if Jun Delirium is going to be featured in that slot, or even Merfolk. That was the one I was debating about. I think Merfolk or Golgari Food. Now, why I like this card, I get it. Mayhem Devil is strictly better if you're in Rakdos, right? This card, I think, is unique and interesting in Jun Food, right? So you don't really have that Mayhem Devil. You would have to splash red. So if there's a world where you really just want to stick to 2-color Golgari, this card definitely has some room. Like, you definitely want to keep in mind that this card does exist and it's interesting. Like I said, just because that fact alone, where you kind of want to actually have a card like Mayhem Devil and a reason to be sacrificing your stuff. Like I said, you just don't want to splash that extra color. So if you're mono black sack, or if you're Orzhov sack, or if you're Golgari sack, this card is interesting for that aspect alone. So I think if you get it on Arena, you should add this to your collection, because there could be, at any point, there could be a solid sacrifice deck that's not red based that could show up in Pioneer or Explorer, and you probably want to have access to this card. So let's get into the next round of honorable mentions. So honorable mentions, we have Get Out, blue, choose 1 counter target creature or enchantment spell. So it's a strictly better Nullify, I think. Second, return up to 1 or 2 target creatures or enchantments you own to your hand. So you could save your threats, which is actually kind of nice. So it has a little bit of flexibility. Untimely Malfunction. So a 1 in a red. Destroy target artifact. It's just a basically nice shatter type effect. Second mode, change the target of a spell or ability with a single target. This could be pretty good against counter spells. So if you're ever facing a blue-based deck, this has some implications there. Last mode, 1 or 2 target creatures can't block this turn. If you're a mono red wizards deck, this is actually interesting for 1 or 2 matchups. So where you might actually struggle, of course, is getting through that stupid Cavalier Thorns. This actually helps, so you can make your 2 opponents 2 Cavalier Thorns, can't block. You get in there with your show off, right? So go ahead and just smack them in the face with it. They get, of course, show off gets a little bit of prowess bonus from casting this Malfunction. Like I said, and then also it's decent against removal, where you could redirect and change the direction of the removal spells, and also can help against artifacts. Now, this is like I think the better honorable mentions, of course, than the previous slide, which is why you see Wandering Rescuer here. 3 white legendary creature, Human Samurai Noble, Flash, Evoke, Double Strike. Other tap creatures you control have hexproof. Now, why this card is not in the top 10 is because, for one, I don't necessarily know if KebbieG even wants this. I will be trying it out just like as a one-of copy in KebbieG, because I don't think you're ever going to be cutting the other 2 better cards in Night, and also the Loxodon. Now, one thing I noticed about playing KebbieG is there's 2 sets of hands that you hate, right? You have your hand where you have, of course, 3 of these effects, and then you feel bad because, well, you're not casting anything and getting these KebbieGers down early enough. And the other hand is when you have all of these cards that go wide, but you don't got that payoff. So I want to try to see if maybe 9 is a good number, and hopefully it doesn't make us too much in the other direction, where we have too many hands where we have 2 or 3 of these KebbieG threats and not enough of the other stuff. So I will be cutting a Thalia for, I think, a Rescuer. So I'm kind of interested to see how that actually pans out. But overall, I do think this card could be interesting. You also could argue it could be a decent sideboard card if you're wanting something against like heavy amounts of removal. Not very good against sweepers, but keep that in mind. So let's get into the top 10 from the set for Pioneer. All right, so number 10 on my list is the Black Overlord of the Baelmerk. It's 3 black, 5/5. You could impending it on 2. So 1 and a black. You can impede it 5 turn cycles, so basically suspend 5. And whenever it enters or attacks, you mill 4 cards. You may return a non-avatar creature or a planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. I like this for one deck in particular. Now, my envisioning with this deck is, of course, is there a Greasefang deck that does not want to be in the 3rd color? The biggest struggle with Greasefang has always been, okay, you need green, right? Or you need this other color to facilitate good self-mill effects. And stuff like Cash Grab, and of course the older one as well, the Golgari one, Grizzly Salvage. These were the reasons to be primarily green. Now, what if I could tell you that maybe we can get away with cutting the green entirely and stick with Orzhov? You can play 4 copies of this. So on turn 2, you mill 4, maybe get back a Fang, bring it to your hand. The following turn, cast it, try to get a Parhelion, smack. So that's kind of where I'm envisioning this card actually existing in the format. Besides that, I don't necessarily think this card's going to make the cut. I do think this is the middle of the cycle of Overlords. There's 2 of them I think definitely are worse than this, that I don't really ever seeing any kind of structured playability in Pioneer. I could be wrong, but we'll see. So that's number 10 on my list. That's kind of what I envision this card actually being. Now, can it show up in decks not Greasefang? Possibly. Could it show up in something like Neoform? But then again, like, could Neoform exist? No, you can't. You need green for Neoform. So you can't actually cut black or the green. And plus you need you don't technically need the monkey, right? the ape. You could just replace it with Scavenger, Stealthy Scavenger, and then you could maybe work it that way. So it doesn't even really work there. So I'm not really sold that this is going to see much play outside of a potential Orzhov Greasefang list. If you have any ideas for Greasefang as an Orzhov shell, let me know down in the comments section. Let's get number 9 on my list. Number 9 is an unbelievable reprint. Pyroclasm, 1 in a red, a sorcery, deals 2 damage to each creature. This card is insane at keeping aggro decks in line. Because it's literally a 2 mana sweeper at 2 damage apiece. Honestly, could restrict how even aggro stands up in this format in general. So, is it going to kill aggro? Maybe. You just haven't really had this effect before. In Pioneer, that is, right? Where on 2 mana, you could basically sweep most creatures from Convoke off the board. So, kind of interesting how this pans out. I do kind of worry, since like the 2 cards that I'm considering trying for the RC is Boros Heroic or Boros Convoke. And both of those could very well get hit by this card and take a huge dip in win rates. So, if you think Pyroclasm is going to wreck aggro in the format, let me know down in the comment section. Let's get into number 8. So number 8 on my list is Reluctant Role Model, 1 in a white, 2/2. The only survival. No, I can't even say that. I can't say that because there is another one up ahead. So this is the first instance where we have survival, and that mechanic is at the beginning of your second main phase. If this thing is tapped, you gain X effect. In this case, we could either put a flying counter, a lifelink, or a +1/+1 counter on this threat. So if he's tapped, now if he dies or another creature dies, if it had counters on it, put those creatures on one target creature. We have not had this effect in Pioneer. So could this actually be a combo? At some point, if they ever print a creature that, like a Walking Ballista, ever, where you just minus counters and deal damage somewhere, look out. Like this, there's something could be here in the long run. Because if you actually look at that how you could construct around this card, it definitely looks like a card that could potentially be a combo piece, right? If you have the OG Ozolith in this one, and you're sacking your little dorks that have counters on them, moving the counters to the Ozolith with Hardened Scales and cycling them around. Remember, Hardened Scales in Modern has Scavenger, which you have Modular, which you can sack things, move the counters around. This does the same thing. So I do kind of, in that regard, if there's something that could like mold this as a type together, and you could sacrifice a 1/1 that has a counter, or an 0/1 that has a counter, and move it over here with Hardened Scales, it gets 2 counters, and then a counter on the Ozolith, with Ozolith moves it over, which gets 2 counters. And you eventually could make a deck where you move around these counters, so eventually you have this gigantic threat that just smacks your opponent in the face and wins the game. A lot like the modern Hardened Scales. So I don't necessarily know if it's possible yet, but this is a good enabler. So now the only thing that definitely hurts this card in general is the fact that it itself is not a sacrifice type card like Scavengers was. Or maybe I'm totally misremembering the name. I'm going to call it Scavengers. You can correct me in the comment section for the engagement. But yes, so I think that is something very interesting. If this could sacrifice another creature, it would be even more cracked, right? But it does not. So I do think this card is interesting, even though I really hate the artwork on this card. Like, this whole entire look on these humans in this set are so cheesy and horrible. I don't even know how to express it. Again, this looks like a Fallout card, to be frank. Same kind of get-up gear on him that basically was in the Fallout set. That aside, let's get to number 7 on my list, and let's get a little more optimistic, I guess. Number 7 is 1 white, split up. Destroy all tap creatures, or destroy all untapped creatures. So where it's tricky about this card, why it's so low on the list at number 7, is because I don't know if Control will get to the point where they want to take out Temporary Lockdown for this, or do they do a mixture of like a 2-2 split? So the advantage of this one, of course, it gets shielded. It gets like decent mid-range pieces like Bone Crusher Giant, whatever, right? Which does not get got by Temporary Lockdown. But Temporary Lockdown it basically makes your get loss much better, right? Because you take away the map tokens that you dish out. Also, you know, against stuff like Scamp and the new hero, Valiant hero, dude, like you exile it, so you're not actually taking damage when it dies. So like there's definitely some contention on which card is better in the current metagame. Me personally, I still say I wished Lockdown was never printed, and that this would be the default. Just because I love the fact that it's not just mass exiling your enchantments, artifacts. I guess you could get Jace too, the 2-mana Jace with the Lockdown, and so on. Which these cards are meant to be diversifying what creature or type package you use against control, so it's harder for them to answer everything. But Lockdown answers everything. So, but I do think this card is in contention. Also, arguably, this card could see some play in stuff like humans or other mono white decks, creature-based, that may want to just cast this after they tap down their stuff with like a Evoke, whatever. There's ways to make this a one-sided Wrath. If you're a creature-based deck, if you can take advantage of that, this might be a decent Wrath for you. Rather, it just be like you're a Selesnya vehicles deck, right? Tap your stuff down to vehicles, and then wipe. Something like that. That's number 7. Let's get to number 6. Number 6 is Unidentified Hover Ship. 1 white 2/2 flying. When it ETBs, you can exile one target creature with a toughness 5 or less. When it leaves play, they get it back, or they just manifest Dread one time. And it has a crew of 1. Now, the question more is this card ever better than Skyclave Appetizers? One deck in particular, I'm going to say yes, 100%. The second deck, probably. So we'll start out with the definite yes. Last season or the season before that, I featured a deck that was like Metalwork Colossus. It had that 3-mana enchantment that whenever you cast an artifact, mana value 3 or greater, you get to make a little construct. This is perfect in that deck. This is a removal spell that you can get off of a Kale's Reconstruction. And it works well with that card, so you get to get it off of Kale's Reconstruction. It's 3 mana value, so you get a construct, you get to eat something. It's a very good tempo play in that deck. The maybe deck is, again, Fang. Right? Fang cares about vehicles. Is there a world where they care about having a removal type of vehicle? Maybe. I don't really know. It's not really a lot of damage. And there could be a world where you might want to do that, where they have an Atraxa, you Grease Fang, get back the hover ship, exile the Atraxa, it bounces the hover ship, so you can cast it next turn. They do get to manifest Dread, and next turn you get to play, of course, the hover ship, exile something else, and rinse and repeat. There could be something there in that regard, but I do think this card is very interesting. Now, nonetheless, I think it's definitely better than the previous cards, but number 5 is when we're going to start getting into like the upper echelon. You could argue that some of these cards might not be better than this one, but I think in the particular decks that they're going to be in, probably are going to be better. I am now offering Patreon and Locals content exclusive. It includes sideboard guides, budget guides, exclusive videos, as well as other types of content. If you want to check out the link, it's in the description. Now, let's get back into the video. So number 5 on my list is Overlord of the Haunt Woods. This is the second best, in my opinion, Overlord. It's 3 green, 6/5. Whenever it attacks or enters, you get to create a tapped colorless land token that's every basic land type. This is going to be baller in standard, right? 3 mana comes down, enables domain. Also, that works, of course, with in Pioneer. If there ever is in a domain deck, it works there too. Now, is this going to be good enough to make the snuff for Fires of Invention / Incarnation, possibly. And that's something that I'm not 100% sure. I'm going to be trying it there. 2 reasons, right? One, it kind of does want the land token, right? You get to, if you ramp with Fires of Invention, of course, you can cast more expensive things for free. So that's kind of nice. It's 3 mana, you get a 5. So you can go to 6, which the next card we'll be covering would be the card you probably end up getting. Just so you could bridge. And I think that's actually pretty reasonable overall. So Incarnation, this could show up. Is this going to show up in something like Green Devotion? Probably not. Unless there's some argument this is better than the Turtle. It could be. It does come down on 3. Adds 2 Devotion. So maybe that actually is an argument in its favor. That it's actually maybe pretty reasonable as a couple copies in Devotion. I'm not necessarily Bobby, so I'm not an expert in Mono Green Devotion. But it could be an interesting card there. Also, it could be interesting in other ramp decks. Sadly, it's not a dinosaur, so it doesn't really work with Thunderherd Migration, which is like the best 2-drop removal. I mean, 2-drop rampant growth type effect. But even, like I said, this could show up somewhere else. Even if it's like a Selesnya domain deck, where you strictly stay in those 2 colors, but this one makes your domain lands. So that's that also could be an interesting approach. And I'm pretty sure they're going to continue with similar ideas as this. I can't imagine this just being a one and done. Like if in the next set they print like a Gruul one and it gives you a Gruul dual land, maybe. Because it doesn't actually force you, of course, to go tutor for a land and get it and play tapped. So it definitely reduces the time it takes to perform this, execute this tax trigger. So let's get into number 4 on my list and let's discuss it. So number 4 is, I think, personally the best of the Overlord cycle. Some of you might not agree. I like it in regards to it works perfectly. It works the best in Incarnation, right? Because Incarnation, you really objectively want to get to 7, right? That's like the most important part of your curve. You have Atraxa, you have Titan of Industry, and then you have Agent of Treachery. So the fact that this is a nice boiler bridge is what you want. So I envision that you're going to go like Fires, then Overlord, ping your opponent's creature for 4. Or you play, of course, Fires into Incarnation. The next turn you play Overlord for 4 and do something else. Sack this, get your Atraxa. There's a lot of things you could do here and make this card a little bit interesting. And of course, kind of have a soft spot for a pseudo Inferno Titan. Even though Prime Time was my favorite of the Titan cycle, I have to acknowledge the fact that it was the best of the cycle only because it can get any land. So it getting a Valakut was the premiere of its top of its A game. But for this case, like this one, it's always 4 damage, which is basically the equivalent of 1 mountain trigger on a Valakut plus 1 damage. So I kind of like this card for the regards to, it reminds me of an old school flavor and nostalgia from the Ritual Titan section or sets. I do kind of, it makes me sad that they don't really ever print divide up the damage as much as they used to. Because if this was a strictly better Inferno Titan, in regards you could divide 4 damage, I mean, wouldn't it really be that oppressive? Inferno Titan, I don't think ever was like that bad. So it definitely, I think that would have been to me, that's a huge letdown. If they would have just put that extra little thing in there where you could divide the 4 damage and take out 2 small threats, that would be kind of nice and sweet. But killing 1 medium-sized threat is probably fine enough. Let's get into number 3 on my list, where we get into the next level, right? These next 3, I think, are the ones that are absolutely going to shake things up. 4 through 6 and 7 are high probability that they probably will shake some stuff up. The last bit of the top 10. Actually, I think everything could potentially shake things up. The set overall past these 10 weren't necessarily the strongest cards in a set, but I do think these cards have a good shot. Let's get to number 3. Hedge Shredder. 2 green. Whenever it attacks, you may mill 2 cards. It is a vehicle. And whenever 1 or more lands are put in your graveyard from the library, Instead, you could put them into play tapped. Crew 1, 5/5. So more or less, you're going to be playing this card for this middle line text right here. So if you're in some sort of self-mill deck and you kind of actively want to get more lands as you mill, and then look out, this could make your deck. The issue is there's not really a deck like that in existence. I can't imagine there's a world where Greasevein actively wants to get this back and get a bunch of lands and put them in play tapped, just to ramp into a hard-casted Parhelion. I don't think that's necessarily a world, but if you think that is a possibility and this is better than Ezekiel's Chariot, or if this takes a couple copies slots where Sky Sovereign was, like, I think it shows up as a 2 of. So if this takes that spot, maybe. But let me know in the comment section if you think Abzan Greasefang could actually want this type of effect. Like I said, just to ramp into a Parhelion naturally. So for combo purposes, I don't really see anything in the format that combos with this. There is some possibilities, like you could do some stuff with the Retreat of Kordheim or whatever that is. There's something that could make you mill some cards and kind of loop them. Since this does trigger landfall and you get to untap some stuff. So I don't know if that's a possibility in the future. But Retreat, of course, is not on Arena. So let's get into number 2 on my list. Number 2 on my list. Wow. Look out, guys. Bogles has a shot now. So, Sheltered by Ghosts. Probably the best aura printed in a very long time. I mean, absolutely a very long time. And this is something I've been asking for a very long time. Something that could basically... I originally asked for, can I get a card that when ETBs, instead of fight, just destroy an artifact or enchantment? That was kind of it. Maybe give like a little bit of a bonus, of course, to the creature. So you get to answer enchantments and artifacts. This is kind of like that. Except this answers anything, right? Until, of course, the creature that is equipped with this dies, right? So where does this see play? Light Paws, this is your best friend now. Because if you have your scout, you put a 2-drop aura on it, you go tutor the Sheltered by Ghost and put it underneath the Light Paws, or even just casting, if you play 4 copies of this in your deck, putting it on your scout, and it gets a +1/+0 and has lifelink and ward. Not a terrible effect. And then you go get the Hexproof aura and put it on your Light Paws. And then at that point, you could just kind of go off a little bit. So I do think this card is actually kind of interesting. Maybe as a 3 copy in Light Paws, Bogles, in Pioneer, Explorer. So I'm very excited about trying this out. Since I love Bogles in general, because it does, even though I wasn't the biggest Bogles player way back when I started in Modern in 2016, it was still a deck I had faced on the reg. And I kind of missed it, right? It kind of got shoved out of Modern. And now we can actually maybe have a decent deck. I think it got 2nd place in that one Pro Tour against Reduke, right? Overall, I'm excited that this is a new out. This is going to be something brand new for Bogles to have a little bit of more interaction and potential game against more of the meta. So I'm excited about it. So let me know down in the comment section if you think Bogles has a shot now of being a legit deck, right? Because I mean, yeah, they still play Blowout and other sack auras, Edict effects, which is pretty bad against the deck. And I think those actually probably are going to be on the dip, right? Because they were mainly seeing a lot of play for Vein Ripper. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be as important going forward when Edict effects probably are not as needed as they used to be. So maybe Bogles can make a little bit of a comeback and punish those players for stop playing Edict effects. Well, let's get into my honorary number 1 and then into number 1. Honestly, let's be honest here. This is probably the best cards in the set. And I don't even think it's close, right? These Verges are pretty base. They're pretty strong. The only weakness of these lands in general is they very much will determine the color pairings potential for 3-color decks in Pioneer. Because right now, as you can see, the last Demir one is a blue-based with black as a supplementary set color. I don't think this is going to determine with the next cycle 3-color decks are viable, right? So for instance, if the Golgari one, of course, is green and then black, then we know Abzan is the color combination that you would play. If, of course, it is black and then green, then we know, of course, Jund with the primary color of black is ideal, right? Because in this case here, whatever is this top icon here should be the primary color in your deck. So if they did this Abzan in, green as the primary, it might be a little awkward since green is not necessarily the best color in most Abzan shells. So it's probably better off if it's actually white as the primary color, which would, I guess that would mean Esper with white priority would be the ideal 3-color pairing. Now, I kind of hope at some point they revisit these and give us the last half of the 10 cycle. So there should be 20 cycles in total, or 20 instances of these cards in total. I kind of hope they give us the full 20, just because green so often needs to be the priority in certain aggro decks, right, or mid-range piles. So the fact that World Boats prioritizes green means that this Verge is not very good for them, right? Because they don't really have that many 1-drops that are red-oriented. It's green-oriented. So they really want to play a elf on turn 1. Now, Hushwood Verge may work in something like Taxes or Angels, where they actively want a turn 1 elf, which is fine, right? But the issue is, I guess, then you need a Temple Garden turn 2 to be able to make this a white. So that's kind of tricky there because Angels is a heavy prioritize in white. So you do need enough ways to enable the second half of this if you want to play in that deck. So there's a little bit of contention there, especially since most Celestia decks, even though the priority on turn 1 is green, turn 2, turn 3, they want white. So is this better? You might play it honestly instead of your pathways. Besides that, it might not show up at all. So if it is the primary color matches the upper color of these, you might replace it with your pathway, right? If it makes sense. So I'm curious to see how these land cycles actually function or how they actually change the meta. I'm hoping in the next set we get a Izzet land that's red primary and blue as secondary. Just because, honestly, I kind of want to have a Teamer, but, as my deck, because that's my favorite 3-color combination. And I'd have no problem prioritizing red, right, in that case scenario. But if the Izzet one is blue then red, then I have a lot of conflict here, and I don't really think it's going to work. I guess unless the Simic one is... No, it wouldn't... That's the problem. Those 2 colors don't match up very well, since it seems like every cycle of these, you're going to have one unique color as a dominant, right? And it's not going to overlap with another one. So if the Simic one would be green-blue, and of course the Izzet one would be blue-red, like there is no cycle among these 3 Verges to actually work, right? So you're kind of just screwed. So I hope, like I said, hopefully we get to the rest of the 20 or the 10. So we have a full 20 cycle of this. But if we don't, these lands are still going to be very good. And like I said, they're going to really push you down to 5 3-color decks. Depending on, of course, Abzan sticks with their different route over there. And that could be a possibility. But let's get into the actual number 1. Kana Rescue Beastie. What a weird name. Rescue Beastie. I'm not going to say the last word. It sounds so weird with the actual name. 3 and a green, legendary creature, Beast Survivor. Survival. If it's tapped on your second main, beginning your second main, you can put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. So, it could be ramp. You could put a land into play tapped. Also, you could play an Omniscience into play tapped. Actually, not even tapped, right? You just play Omniscience down. That's a possibility. There's other cards you definitely could do. Certain cards are worse than others, like the Eldrazi, right? They all have cash triggers, so they're not really doing something for you here, in general. But stuff like Omni is going to be quite nice here. the one with the multiverse, if there's Portal to Phyrexia, like any of these big artifact or enchantments, could very well be a nice splash into this deck. I don't think there's a world where you're actually going to put down like a World Spy Worm. Doesn't seem very logical. So there could be some creatures that you might want for a huge discount. But honestly, I'm not sure if there's a creature that's has a good enough ETB, unless it's like Agent of Treachery, that you want to be doing all this effort just to accomplish it, right? The benefit of something like Omni, one with the multiverse and Portal with Phyrexia, they're just, once they come down, they are huge headaches for the opponent. Creatures can easily be answered, so much easier than the other cards. So what do you guys think about my list? What was your number one pick from this set for Pioneer? Any cards that I missed, let me know down in the comment section. And until next time, where we play, actually not for a little bit, right? It's going to be a couple weeks. I do plan on, I got to decide which 3 decks I'm featuring right out of the gate. I do think I'm going to do Boros Calamity week 1 for the Jank Tank video. Cavalcade Calamity is a sweet card. That new doll, that's just the new Annabelle, could work with that, where you just drain your opponent for a decent amount based on how many creatures you have that are 2 or less power, but in this case, everything is 1 power. So I kind of want to see how that actually pans out. Like I said, until next time, hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Talk to you soon.